I've left this for a couple of weeks so that all the emotions could calm down, and now that they have, we can soberly assess what happened and explain why Whoopi Goldberg said that the Holocaust isn't about race, and discuss some of the important issues this whole controversy has raised. If you haven't heard, Whoopi Goldberg was on a talk show called The View, where they emote about stuff that no sane man would care about, which is why I'm not surprised that something stupid was said on the show, and on this occasion Whoopi Goldberg said that the Holocaust isn't about race. I would play the clip, but I don't want to have my video taken down by copyright, so instead I'm just going to quote what was said, which is actually a good thing because with all the yapping, it's very difficult to hear what's actually being said at times, so I'll make it all clear for you. The panel start talking about how some books, like Mouse, got banned, and Whoopi says that these books are about the Holocaust, the killing of 6 million people, and the books were banned because of bad language and nudity. So, note, at this point she's not denying the Holocaust, and she's questioning the censorship of books about it, which is all good. Then another host on the show, Joy Bayer, says, and I quote, "I'm not sure that they don't use the naked part as a kind of canard to throw you off from the fact they don't like history that makes white people look bad." This is the first time I've ever heard all white people being blamed for the Holocaust. Usually it's the National Socialists or maybe the Germans and Austrians who get the blame, but apparently it's all white people now. Of course, even Hitler would have disagreed with you because Hitler believed in the Aryan race, and while the Aryan race had light skin, that doesn't include every white person. You could have a white-skinned person who has a grandfather who was black. Well, in National Socialist terminology, that person, even though they are white-skinned, would not be classed as white or Aryan. So, a better way to think about how the National Socialists define this concept of Aryan would be to say that the Aryan is someone who has a purity of blood. Now, it also depends on which National Socialist you speak to. Himmler did care about your skin colour as well as the way you looked. That's why he was running about the place measuring people's noses and looking at their eye colours and so on. But even then, when Himmler took over the Volksdeutsche Mittelstelle in 1940, the ethnic German liaison office, he was in charge of assessing whether people were full-blooded Germans or not. Hans Gunther, the race pope, and yes, you did just hear me say that, believed that the Germans outside of Germany, the Volksdeutsche, had contaminated their blood by mixing it with their Slavic neighbours. Slavs also have white skin, by the way. So Himmler and the race pope started classifying these Germans as second and third tier Germans, Volksdeutsche. Thus, you actually have white-skinned Germans who were classed as non-Aryans. That's why the Austrian-born Hitler, arguably a Volksdeutscher himself, thoroughly despised most ethnic Germans as degenerates. There were, in any case, according to specialists, different Volksdeutsche species. Further evidence is provided by German historian Rainer Zeichelmann, who explains that Hitler himself believed that the German race was actually made up of multiple different races. He didn't tell the German people publicly because he wanted to unify the Germans rather than create a civil war, but the point is that Hitler didn't just view someone as Aryan based on the fact that they were a white German. He actually rejected the idea of classifying someone from appearance alone. Instead, he argued that people should be defined as Aryan based on their abilities. Racial war need not break out within the German race if people are selected not according to their appearance, but according to their achievements. Looks and ability are often quite far apart. You can make the selection according to the appearance, and you can make it, as the National Socialist Party has done, according to the test of life. So, when we dig down into the details, it turns out that National Socialism isn't actually about the white race. Yes, the whiteness idea might be appealing to the skinheads who end up in prison with multiple swastika tattoos on their foreheads, But to the actual intellectuals and leaders of the National Socialist movement, it's not about the skin colour at all, it's about the purity of the blood. White skin might be an indication that someone has blood purity, but it's not the only factor. So let's just read this quote again. I'm not sure that they don't use the naked part as a kind of canard to throw you off from the fact they don't like history that makes white people look bad. Yes, even before Whoopi has said the main controversial thing that she's about to say, we already have another host on the show saying something that's not only wrong, but also damaging to anyone who's got white skin. Because by saying that they, the white people, don't like history that makes white people look bad, she's not only suggesting that the Holocaust was caused by white-skinned people, and therefore all white people are bad, but also that white-skinned people are all conspiring to censor the history of the Holocaust, and that's just simply not true. Whoopi responded by saying, "This is white people doing it to white people. Y'all gonna fight amongst yourselves." Well, as Whoopi is saying this, and I wish I could play the clip, all the other ladies on the panel are in agreement with her. You can hear one or two of them say, yes. And more importantly, none of them up until this point have disagreed with what's been said. Not one of them has challenged her on this. Then Sarah Haynes proceeds to monologue for a while about how kids should turn off the TV. And yes, if you're a kid watching TV, what are you doing? But the other hosts chat for about 3 minutes before Whoopi finally makes the extremely controversial statement that goes viral. So there's 3 minutes here where at any moment one of the other 4 hosts could have stepped in and corrected Whoopi on the idea that the Holocaust was about white people versus white people and thus not about race. But they didn't. And the reason why was because they agreed with her at that moment. So whether you realise it or not, Whoopi has already stated that the Holocaust wasn't about race, it's just that she didn't say those exact words, and thus they agreed with her or didn't pick up on it. Anyway, after a couple of minutes of back and forth talking about non-relevant stuff, Sarah Haynes re-enters the spotlight and says, "If I send my kids to school, I want them to be uncomfortable. I want people to push back on their beliefs. Otherwise, we're not preparing kids to go out into the real world. We're preparing them for a world that doesn't exist outside of their own house." Whoopi responds to this by saying, well also, if you're going to do this, let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. Obviously she got a little bit of a pushback after saying this, at which point she affirms, no, it's not about race. The panel ends up bickering for a couple of seconds and it's difficult to make out what was said, but Joy Behar can just about be heard calling over the others, saying something like, well, they consider Jews a different race. And this is correct, but I just want to clarify that the Jews were considered to be the worst of all the races. So to a National Socialist, they didn't dislike the Jews just because they were a different race. They were disliked because they had the most impure blood. The way Hitler explains it in Mein Kampf is, he says that only pure-blooded Aryans can create nations. So according to him, every nation that has ever existed was created by pure breeds. He then says that these Aryans then conquered other peoples and had relations with them, mixed their pure blood with the corrupt blood, weakening their own blood, and thus caused the downfall of their nation, since only pure-blooded people can create nations apparently. Therefore, in Hitler's mind, the whole of human history can be explained by saying nations rise and fall based on the purity of blood. All the great civilizations of the past became decadent because the originally creative race died out as a result of contamination of the blood. This is why he sets out his National Socialism as a way to guarantee that the pure-blooded Aryans remain pure from the other bad blood. And the way he would do that is by preventing Germans from having relations with other non-Germans, but also by centrally planning the removal of the Jews from society, hence the Holocaust. Now, why did Hitler hate the Jews specifically? If Aryans are white-skinned people, you'd think that Hitler would pick the opposite of white to be the worst race, right? In other words, black-skinned people, let's say. And yet, he didn't do that. He picked the Jews, who have pale skin, or tend to. So, what's going on here? Well, obviously, it's not about skin colour. The way Hitler explains it in Mein Kampf is that the Jews have never had a nation. He then says that this is proof that they are the opposite to the pure-blooded Aryan.
Since the Jew never had a civilization of his own, he has always been furnished by others.
So, because they've got the most corrupt blood, this is the reason why Hitler thinks the Jews have never had a nation and can't have a nation.
If the Jews were the only people in the world, they would be wallowing in filth and mire, and would exploit one another and try to exterminate one another in a bitter struggle.
Hitler then explains that the Jews are a parasitic entity, a disease or a virus, that infiltrates the other nations and races in a desperate attempt to keep their race alive by feeding off the other races.
Jewish self-expansion is a parasitic phenomenon, since the Jew is always looking for new pastures for his race.
But wait a second, he says. If the Jews are infiltrating their way into the Aryan nations and intermixing their bad blood with the blood of the Aryans, he says that this will cause the downfall of that nation.
The Jew wiggles his way in among the body of the nations and bores them hollow from inside. The weapons with which he works are lies and calumny, poisonous infection and disintegration until he has ruined his hated adversary.
Worse, Hitler says, if the Jews infiltrate every nation and mix their blood with the Aryan blood, then all Aryans will disappear, at which point all the nations of the world will collapse. All civilization will die out, since there are no Aryans.
Should he, the Aryan, be forced to disappear, a profound darkness will descend on the earth. Within a few thousand years, human culture will vanish, and the world will become a desert.
I've joked about this before, but Hitler genuinely believed that he was trying to save the world. He thought that he was trying to save human civilization. Just let that one sink in for a moment. And yes, to me, this is the ultimate lesson here, because Hitler believed that he was the good guy in his own story. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, sort of. But note, even though they were white or pale-skinned, the Jews are deemed by National Socialists to be worse than people with darker skin. Why? Because Africans have had nations before, so to a National Socialist they must have at least some Aryan blood in them. Of course, that doesn't mean that National Socialists like black people, it just means that the Jews are seen as worse than black people. This is why what Whoopi Goldberg is about to say next is so off the mark, it's just silly.
But it's not about race, it's not about race. Joy interjects, what is it about? Whoopi explains, it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about. We'll come back to assess this statement in a minute, but if you don't know what she means, don't worry. I don't think anyone did at this moment. Ana Navarro then says, but it's about white supremacy. Again, this is technically incorrect, but we've already been over it, so I won't explain it again. But at least she's trying to convey to Whoopi that the Holocaust was actually about race. Anna then says something about them going after the Jews and the Gypsies, and it's hard to make out exactly what's being said because they're all talking over each other. Finally, the others go quiet, and Whoopi clarifies her stance by saying, but these are two white groups of people. Now, bearing in mind that she has already said this 3 minutes earlier with the whole this is white people doing it to white people, y'all gonna fight amongst yourselves, and nobody challenged her at that point, but the other hosts do try to challenge her now, and there's more noise which makes it difficult to hear what's being said. However, Sarah Haynes can just about be heard calling out, but they didn't see them as white people. Whoopi then manages to shout the others into submission and says, "But you're missing the point. The minute you turn it into race, it goes down this alley." She points to her side. "Let's talk about it for what it is. It's how people treat each other. It's a problem. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Jews, Italians, everybody is it." And I think at this point she realises that she's in trouble and starts to ramble in an attempt to get out of the mess she's in, because what she says next doesn't really make sense. She continues, "If you're uncomfortable if you hear about Maus, one of the banned books, should you be worried if that's me? No, that's not what they're going to say. They're going to say I don't want to be like that." I think it's Joy who then says, "Well, hopefully." Whoopi agrees. "Well, yeah, most kids, they don't want to be cruel." Anna, though, steps in and tries to change the subject and possibly damage control, and we're living in an era where people are comparing YouTube censorship cards to the yellow stars, where people are comparing YouTube censorship to what Anne Frank went through, so it is necessary for kids to learn about the Holocaust. Obviously, I have to censor my speech here because of YouTube's communist guidelines, and I don't know enough about Anna to know if she's on the side of medical segregation and my body their choice, or if she's against that, since this statement could be taken both ways, but I will agree with her regarding teaching kids and adults about the Holocaust, because clearly there seems to be some misunderstanding regarding what happened. Whoopi chimed in saying, "And learn about man's inhumanity to man, however it exposes itself." Joy then starts talking, but Whoopi is forced to cut her off and end the show. But what I find interesting is the phrase, "man's inhumanity to man." This is actually an idiom, and it comes from a poem in 1784, so this is a well-known phrase. Here's what one website says about it. "The idiom man's inhumanity to man refers to human cruelty, barbarity, or lack of pity and compassion towards other humans, essentially mankind's ability to see and treat other people as less than human. Generally, man's inhumanity to man is used as an expression of regret when some great tragedy occurs. The 20th century with 2 world wars, the Holocaust, the rise of numerous oppressive governments and several more wars was a showcase of man's inhumanity to man. Mankind inflicted immense, almost unfathomable suffering on itself with each of those events. In modern context, the phrase seems to be applied to any type of perceived injustice." So yes, the phrase does apply to the Holocaust. The National Socialists saw and treated the Jews as less than human. But what Whoopi Goldberg has failed to grasp is that the National Socialists saw and treated the Jews as less than human because of their race. Without the racial issue, the Nazis have no reason to view the Jews as less than human. So it's actually both. It's man's inhumanity to man and the racial issue, which is actually what Whoopi Goldberg said later that same day. She took to Twitter to apologise for what she said. "On today's show, I said the Holocaust is not about race, but about man's inhumanity to man. I should have said it is about both. As Jonathan Greenblatt from the Anti-Defamation League shared, the Holocaust was about the Nazis' systematic annihilation of the Jewish people, who they deemed to be an inferior race. I stand corrected. The Jewish people around the world have always had my support, and that will never waver. I am sorry for the hurt I have caused. Written with my sincerest apologies, Whoopi Goldberg." Well, nobody's perfect, she's made a mistake, and she's apologised, so I guess we can all live and learn and move on with our lives. Oh wait, no. She then went on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, where she upset even more people because she didn't apologise live on air and actually doubled down on her original take. Worse, it shows that she didn't really believe in her previous Twitter apology. Because I feel being black, when we talk about race, it's a very different thing to me. So I said that I felt that the Holocaust wasn't about race, and people got very, very, very angry, and still are angry. I mean, I'm getting, all of the mail from folks, and very real anger, because people feel very differently.
Well, no, it's not about how people feel, it's about the facts. People don't feel differently, they're annoyed that you don't know the very basic fact that the Nazis were racists. Because think about it, if you say that the Holocaust isn't about race, and if you say that it's just two white groups fighting each other, then does that mean that the Nazis aren't racist? If so, you would be wrong. So it doesn't matter about how you feel, it's about the facts. Emotionalism versus rationalism, rationalism wins.
But I thought it was a salient discussion because, as a black person, I think of race as being something that I can see. So I see you and I know what race you are, and the discussion was about how I felt about that.
And this is the reason I wanted to do this video. Current views on race centre around the ideas of the critical race theorists who are trying to paint white people as the root of all evil. As one doctor and ex-political science and law professor at Vanderbilt University has said,
critical race theory is an analytical framework to analyse institutions and culture. Its purpose is to divide the world into white oppressors and non-white victims. Instead of traditional forms of knowledge, it uses personal narratives of marginalised minority victim groups, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, as irrefutable evidence of the dishonesty of their mostly white heterosexual oppressors. The ultimate goal of this theory's proponents is to remake society so that the victim class eventually displaces the oppressors and becomes the new ruling class.
James Lindsay, who is the author of a new fantastic book that I highly recommend, has called critical race theory nothing other than race Marxism.
Critical race theory is the belief that racism that benefits white people, white supremacy, is the fundamental organising principle of society, and that is bad. The point of critical race theory is to shift leftist politics away from economic concerns and the plight of labour, the working class, and to the politics of identity. If black liberation movements can be channeled into a critical consciousness by Marcuse's leftist intelligentsia in the universities and its radicalised student base, a new revolutionary proletariat could emerge that has the necessary energy to successfully push Western societies into socialism.
Essentially, these socialists want to piggyback off of racial conflict in order to seize power, and this is important because all Whoopi is doing here is expressing this critical race theory mumbo-jumbo, whether she realises that's what she's doing or not, and the other hosts are guilty of it too. Everything is very much centred around how white or non-white things are, with the implication being that white people are bad, except for the Jews, because even though the Jews are white-skinned, they are good. Or are they? Because critical race theory is race Marxism, and Marx himself was a raging anti-Semite. Just like Hitler, Marx wanted to remove the Jews from society, since after all, the Jews, according to Marx, were the capitalists.
What is the worldly cult of the Jew? Huckstering. What is his worldly god? Money. Money is the jealous god of Israel, besides which no other god may exist. Christ drove the Jewish money changers out of the temple, and that the money changers of our age enlisted on the side of tyranny happen again to be Jews is perhaps no more than a historic coincidence. As soon as society succeeds in abolishing the empirical essence of Judaism, huckstering and its conditions, the Jew becomes impossible, because his consciousness no longer has an object. The social emancipation of the Jew is the emancipation of society from Judaism. In other words, to free the Jews, Marx says, society needs to free itself from Judaism, i.e., remove the Jews from society. And finally, The capitalist knows that all commodities, however scurvy they may look, or however badly they may smell, are in faith and in truth money, inwardly circumcised Jews, and what is more, a wonderful means whereby out of money to make more money. Translation: the offspring of the capitalists are inwardly circumcised Jews, because the capitalists are the Jews themselves.
So it's no coincidence that the Marxist critical race theorists see white people as the enemy, or that white people are the guys who run the capitalist system, since by white people what they actually mean is the Jews, since the Jews are white people. The revolution against the bourgeoisie will be another Holocaust of the Jews. It wasn't just Hitler who led a revolutionary movement that killed the Jews. Lenin did too, and so did Stalin. Yet people have no idea what's going on because they refuse to learn from history. The religion of socialism has blinded people to the reality of this cult. So let me make this very clear. All socialism is anti-Semitic, since the Jews were traditionally and historically perceived to be fundamentally capitalist and bourgeois. The word bourgeoisie means townfolk, and because the Jews weren't allowed to own land in Christian Europe, they were forced to live in towns, boroughs, and became the bourgeoisie. They then had to make a living practicing usury, which is the lending of money and charging interest, something no Christian was allowed to do because the Pope had banned usury. So the Jews became the money changers, or the capitalists, and that's why the socialists don't like them, because the Jews were perceived to be greedy and skimming the money off the top of the Aryan workers.
Think about what Hitler said before in that quote. If the Jews were the only people in the world, they would be wallowing in filth and mire and would exploit one another and try to exterminate one another in a bitter struggle.
Well, what does the socialists think would happen if we were left to the ravages of the free market? We would just exploit one another and try to exterminate one another in a bitter struggle. It's all the same garbage, it's all the same ideology, it's all socialism. A race is a social group. Racism is socialism. Socialism is also racism. That's why Hitler called his ideology National Socialism, since the race was the nation and the nation is a society, a socialism. There's no difference between the nationalisation of the means of production, the socialisation of the means of production, and the racialisation of the means of production. It's all the same thing. This all comes back round because Whoopi Goldberg has bought into the critical race theory lie. In her eyes, race is nothing other than a skin colour, and the white people are bad. What she might not have realised is that by that logic, the Jews would also be bad since they have white skin. And I say that because when I was a socialist, I didn't realise that socialism had anything to do with anti-Semitism. As soon as I realised that it was fundamental to the ideology, I instantly stopped being socialist. Well, I like to think that most socialists are in the same camp that I was in. They're just ignorantly calling for another revolutionary Holocaust without realising what they're doing. So I suspect that Whoopi Goldberg, like many socialists watching this, just haven't figured this out yet.
Anyway, I feel being black, when we talk about race, it's a very different thing to me. So I said that I felt that the Holocaust wasn't about race, and people got very, very, very angry, and still are angry. I mean, I'm getting, all the mail from folks, and very real anger, because people feel very differently. But I thought it was a salient discussion because, as a black person, I think of race as being something that I can see. So I see you and I know what race you are. And the discussion was about how I felt about that. I felt that it was really more about man's inhumanity to man and how horrible people can be to people. And we are seeing it manifest itself these days. But people were very angry and they said, no, we are a race. And I understand. I felt differently. Yes, she doesn't feel that the Jews are a race, although the Jews are adamant that they are, which is a topic we'll come back to later. But whether they are or not, the National Socialists did believe the Jews to be a race, so therefore it is racism. And again, it highlights that she thinks that Jews are white, and therefore, since whites are bad, that must mean that the Jews are bad, right? So it's no wonder then that people are digging up her previous anti-Semitic comments in the past. In 1993, Whoopi Goldberg submitted a recipe for a celebrity cookbook titled Jewish American Princess Fried Chicken. The Anti-Defamation League slammed it as insulting and anti-Semitic. Her agent tried to justify it by claiming she was Jewish. According to the Western Journal, a Jewish American princess is a pejorative stereotype of a Jewish American woman who is portrayed as materialistic, selfish, and from a pampered or wealthy background, according to tvtropes.org. It's a lousy recipe with insensitive and anti-Semitic ingredients. Whoopi should know better.
Apparently, this was all dismissed because Whoopi Goldberg said she was Jewish. Yes, it turns out that Whoopi Goldberg's real name is Karen Johnson, and she took the pseudonym Goldberg because she has Jewish ancestry.
My family is Jewish, Buddhist, Baptist, and Catholic, none of which I subscribe to, by the way, as I don't believe in man-made religions, so I took the last name for a Jewish ancestor, and I happen to be gaseous, which explains the first name, short for whoopee cushion. But I can't tell if this is true or not because the Daily Mail reported Whoopi has told in the past of choosing her stage name and Goldberg because her mother thought it would get it further in Hollywood. Journalist Eve Barlow told the news outlet that notion plays into two anti-Semitic tropes, that Jews run Hollywood and they help each other to get jobs.
Okay, let's just assume for a second that race was all about skin colour, which is what Whoopi believed. She said that the Holocaust was not about race because it was white versus white. But hold on, Whoopi Goldberg claims that she's Jewish. So therefore, she is a black Jew. So it's not white versus white because Whoopi is Jewish and she's black. She is the living embodiment of the fact that Jews don't necessarily have to be white. Yet somehow, she somehow didn't think that Jews could be non-white. I don't get it. How did she not figure this out? Unless she thinks that all Jews are white, and therefore Whoopi Goldberg, who is a Jew, would therefore also be white.
Yes, that's right, guys. Whoopi Goldberg could be white. Honestly, this is why the idea of race doesn't work. I've been on record before showing this screenshot of National Geographic and pointing out that there's no scientific basis for race, and people have pushed back on me about this stance, but their arguments don't hold up when you think about them critically.
If race is defined as a skin colour, then Whoopi would technically be correct, because the Holocaust was one white-skinned people attacking another white-skinned people, in theory at least, excluding the non-white Jews like herself. So, if that was the case, then how could it be classed as a racial issue? And since we know that the Holocaust was about race, then that invalidates the idea that race is defined by skin colour. If, on the other hand, you said that race is defined by culture or religion, then the Jews would have been able to convert from Judaism to Christianity to avoid being persecuted or adopt German culture, which they did in previous eras when attacked by Christians. The National Socialists, though, didn't view the Jews as a culture or a religion, but as a race. Hitler actually states this in Mein Kampf. So they rejected the idea of allowing the Jews to convert from Judaism to save themselves. Thus, if you were deemed to be Jewish, there was no getting out of it. You would be sent to the camps. So this invalidates the idea that race is defined by culture or religion.
And if you say that race is defined by genetics, again, there's no scientific basis for race. It's not genetic.
And if you say that ethnicity is different to race and define ethnicity based on common national, tribal, language or heritage, then you run into the same problems as before. Hitler rejected the idea that the Jews were German even though they shared a common national tribal heritage and language. German Jews fought in the First World War for Germany. Jews had been living in Germany for centuries. They spoke German, a significant portion of the Nazi leadership had Jewish ancestry. Hardly any of them were blonde, blue-eyed Super Saiyans. And there's a debate about whether Hitler himself had Jewish grandparents. Also, I'm technically classed as an Anglo-Saxon and I learnt a bit of German, so I guess I can identify as being German now. And if not, why not? Because I now share a common national tribal language and heritage. The point of all this is to say that the concepts of race and ethnicity are flimsy and don't actually work in practice. And even concepts like nationalism don't make sense either. If I said that all British people watch football and drink lager, then that would be a lie, because, well, I don't. I've got better things to do than watch people rolling on grass pretending to be hurt, and I prefer ale to lager. So, am I not British then? Oh, but I'm white and was born in the British Isles, so therefore I must be British, right? Except there are many Jews, as well as others, who were born on the British Isles, and many are trying to argue that they are a different race to the English, Scots, Welsh, Irish and Liverpudlians. So why aren't the Jews living in Britain being classed as being part of the British people? And if you argue that they're not British because they have a different religion or culture, again, there are many British people who aren't religious or have a different culture to the way that the majority believe in. So Yorkshire has a completely different culture to London or Liverpool. Plus, if they converted to the culture, then I guess they'd no longer be Jews, right? And this all comes round to the fact that the idea of trying to place people into social groups, be they racial, ethnic, national, social, whatever, this idea doesn't work. And if the idea of trying to divide us into groups doesn't work, then that means we're not groups of people. Instead, we are individuals. Every man is an island. There are no workers or bourgeoisie, there are no races or nationalities or social groups. There's just individuals, and we're all competing against each other, be that on a friendly basis or not.
I respect everything everyone is saying to me, and, I don't want to fake apologise, I'm very upset that people have misunderstood what I was saying.
Nobody has misunderstood you, Whoopi. We know exactly what you're saying. You believe that race is defined by skin colour, and that false view has got you in trouble.
And so, because of it, they're saying that I'm anti-Semitic and that I'm denying the Holocaust and all of these other things, which, would never have occurred to me to do. I thought we were having a discussion about race, which everyone, I think, is having.
If you deny that it's a racial thing because it's white versus white, then you deny the very reason for it happening. Just like if you deny that National Socialism is socialism, you also take away how the Holocaust happened, right? Because the death camps are not a free market. People weren't buying goods and services, then suddenly there was a Kristallnacht. No, it was centrally planned. It was socially planned. The Germans seized the means of production during their national revolution and did their best to remove the Jews from society. But if you deny the socialism inherent in National Socialism, then none of this could have happened. So socialists who deny that Hitler was a socialist are inadvertently denying the Holocaust, just like Whoopi here is inadvertently denying it too.
After Whoopi had made her case, Stephen Colbert stepped in and said, "As a white guy in the conversation here, I am neither Jewish nor black, so I have a different perspective in all this."
Thank you, Stephen, for clarifying that you aren't black. For a minute there, I wasn't sure.
It seems to me that whiteness is a construct created by colonial powers during the beginning of colonial imperialist era in order to exploit other people, and that they could apply it to all different kinds of people. That idea of race.
Yes, because racism only started in the colonial era, apparently, and there wasn't any racism before then or anything, and it's also all white men's fault. No, I'm not even going to go there with this one because it's not worth it. If someone who's a genuine non-lefty historian wants to explain why there wasn't any racism before the colonial era is just wrong, go ahead, but I'm going to move on.
And the American experience tends to be based on skin.
Yes, that's why America is having problems, isn't it? It's like the American experience with socialism is non-existent. You've not really had real socialism before, and when you do eventually have it, you'll figure out extremely quickly exactly why everyone else around the world who has experienced it is saying that you don't want it. You really don't want it. But hey, you do you.
So Stephen says the American experience is based on skin, and Whoopi replied, "Yes, and so that is what race means to me. When you talk about being a racist, I was saying you can't call this racism. This was evil. This wasn't based on the skin. You couldn't tell who was Jewish. They had to delve deeply to figure it out."
They actually didn't. There's a famous example where some Russian prisoners were circumcised, but the Germans just assumed they were Jews and shot them.
Very occasionally, Jews survive by claiming to be circumcised Muslims. More often, circumcised Muslims were shot as Jews. German doctors seem to have collaborated willingly in this procedure. Medicine was a highly Nazified profession. At least 50,000 Soviet Jews were shot after selection in the Soviet POW camps, and about 50,000 non-Jews as well.
But yes, the Nazi theologians were trying to figure out how to define what a race was, and how to identify people who were of a particular race. And guess what? They couldn't do it. Because race isn't a scientific thing, which was why they ended up just making it up as they went along.
Anyway, Stephen Colbert then said, "Well, I think one of the reasons why the people might say, and again, I am not Jewish and I'm not black, but as someone who understands, what I've read about how the Nazis operated, when they found out that you were of the Jewish race, that's why they'd made you wear a star so they could see you and identify you." Yes, that is true, although they also did it to humiliate and segregate the Jews from the rest of society, but the fact that they did this is further proof that they didn't have a scientific way of figuring out who was Jewish or not. Whoopi then said, "Yes, but my point is that they had to do the work. If the Klan is coming down the street and I'm standing with a Jewish friend and neither well, I'm going to run." The audience laughed. "But if my friend decides not to run, they'll get passed by most times because you can't tell who's Jewish. It's not something people say, oh, that person is Jewish or this person is Jewish." And so that's what I was trying to explain. Except, yes, they do. I have screenshots of Nazis on my channel saying that I looked like a Jew and then calling me Levi Bartenstein. My name is Lewis Barton, so they're playing on that. Therefore, when someone who isn't even Jewish is getting told that he looks like a Jew, I think that's confirmation that a minority of people walk around trying to identify people as Jews. There was also a recent incident in Brooklyn College in the USA where a bunch of Jews were harassed by their critical race theory professors and fellow students and told that they must identify as white. They were also accused of being society's oppressors. The US Department of Education launched an investigation into Brooklyn College over claims of severe anti-Semitic harassment of students by professors and fellow students. Examples of harassment against Jewish students include an instance where a person in a WhatsApp student group chat allegedly said they wanted to strangle a Jewish student and received supportive messages from other students. A person attempted to defend the victim but was told by the person who made the threat that Jewish people are part of the dominant culture of white people who continue to perpetrate power structures. By advancing the racist and ethnic stereotype that all Jews are white and privileged and therefore oppress people of colour, faculty members, students and course assignments in the mental health counselling program invoke the classical anti-Semitic trope that Jews possess disproportionate power and influence in society, which they use for nefarious purposes against non-Jews, while also subjecting them to racial stereotypes about whites, the complaint states. The complaint also alleged that a Jewish student tried to tell an administrator that they shouldn't have to identify as white, but the administrator shut the person down, saying that the matter wasn't up for debate. I'm a Hispanic person of colour, and yet even I was told by faculty and administrators in the programme that because I am Jewish, I enjoy the privileges of whiteness and that my skin colour would not save me. My identity as a Jewish person of colour was invalidated and erased in this programme, a student who wished to remain anonymous told JNS. I was then vilified and harassed for an identity that was imposed on me by others, that of a privileged white oppressor of people of colour.
It's almost as if the woke critical race theorists and racial socialist Marxists are changing their words once again. Rather than saying that the Jews were stealing wealth from the Aryans, Karl Marx simply changed the words and said that the bourgeoisie, the Jews, were stealing off the workers, the Aryans. Now, the new wave of Marxists have changed the words again to hide their true meaning. Instead of Jew, they now say white. Instead of worker, they now say people of colour. It's the same game. They've just swapped the words around. You know, this is where Hitler messed up. He was too honest about what socialism was actually trying to achieve, which is the murder of the Jews.
I think I've made my point. It's not something people say, oh, that person is Jewish or this person is Jewish. And so that's what I was trying to explain. And I understand that not everybody sees it that way. And that I did a lot of harm, I guess, to myself. And people, decided I was all these other things. I'm actually not. And I'm incredibly torn up by being told these things about myself. And I get it. Folks are angry. I accept that and I did it to myself. This was my thought process, and I will work hard not to think that way again. Notice that it's all about her. I felt, I feel, and I did this to myself. It's all about her, not about how she made others feel or how factually wrong she actually was. And the reason why is because at this point at least, she didn't believe she was wrong. Yet the audience clapped, and Stephen Colbert asked, have you come to understand that the Nazis saw it as race? Because asking the Nazis, they would say, yes, it's a racial issue. Whoopi replied, well, see, this is what's interesting to me because the Nazis lied. It wasn't. They had issues with ethnicity, not with race, because most of the Nazis were white people, and most of the people they were attacking were white people. So to me, I'm thinking, how can you say it's about race if you are fighting each other? So it all really began because I said, how will we explain to children what happened in Nazi Germany? I said this wasn't racial, this was about white on white. And everyone said, no, it was racial. And so that's where all this came from. So once again, don't write me anymore. I know how you feel. Okay, I already know. I get it. And I'm going to take your word for it and never bring it up again.
Colbert then cut to a break. Now, notice she didn't actually apologise at any point on the Colbert Show, and her remarks at the end suggest that she's agreeing to disagree, and that she still thought that race was all about skin colour, and that the Holocaust wasn't about race, but was about ethnicity instead. Now, the Nazis made it about race, not ethnicity, so it was a racial issue. Modern critical racists might consider it to be ethnicity or whatever, but that's a factually incorrect view. The National Socialists defined the Jews as a race. And I would argue, as I did before, there's no scientific basis for race or ethnicity anyway. But anyway, because Whoopi didn't apologise on the show, people weren't happy. One comment on the YouTube video of the show says,
as a German who feels a deep sense of responsibility arising from the darkest episode of history to ensure that the Holocaust can never happen again, I do not even know what to say to this extreme stupidity. Her initial comments about the Holocaust have shocked me, but this incredible self-serving, I think he was meant to say, an egocentric appearance and non-apology have made it all so worse. What the actual flack? But this whole thing sparked another discussion because people were questioning what the definition of race actually was. One person said, she's talking about race as discrimination in the context of skin tone. The problem with the concept of race is that it's a social construct, not something biological. but we are still using it to define and divide people with outdated/ignorant racial categories, which are mainly based on skin tone. We need to get rid of that stupid method of categorizing people. When my daughter was born at the hospital, the first question I got right after I pushed her out, and she had just gotten her umbilical cord cut, was, "What's her race?" I was like, "Human." But she still got labelled as Mexican, which is not even a race, and I was not born in Mexico either, but happened to be brown. Instead of cancelling her, we should be discussing why we even have to categorise each other based on skin tone. That's the conversation we should be having.
Exactly. Not only does the ideas of race and ethnicity not make sense, but the statists are trying to slot each of us into racial and ethnic groups so that they can divide us and exploit us. Yet people don't see this and just eat it up.
Well, according to critical race theorists, only white people can be racist, and apparently leftist authors are very adamant that all white people are automatically racist, and there's no such thing as reverse racism, meaning non-whites cannot be racist towards whites. Well, events in South Africa would disagree with you, and I would also disagree with you because there's no scientific basis for race. Follow the science. There's no scientific basis for race. You're not a science denier, are you? You're not a flat earther, are you?
And this is where I'm going to leave you with a question. Whoopi finally appeared on The View again and admitted that she was wrong and that she stood corrected. She said that the Jews are a race, and yes, the National Socialist said that the Jews were a race and the Holocaust was about racism, and a lot of Jewish people responded to Whoopi Goldberg saying that the Jews are a race, and now Whoopi Goldberg herself has converted to the idea that the Jews are a race. But is this really the case? Are they a race or an ethnicity? Does race as a concept actually exist? Does it have scientific backing, or does it not? Is it a social construct? How do we define it? And if race doesn't exist, then how can you say that anyone is a race? So there's a whole issue surrounding this, and this is partly why I wanted to wait to do this video to ask the question, does race exist? And even if it does, how are you defining that? And are the Jews or the British or the Germans actually a race? Academic Agent has done a video briefly exploring this debate and looking at whether the Jews are a race or not. He's better read than I am on that topic, so I'll leave a link to his video on the screen and in the description below. I would encourage you all to have a listen to what he says and think critically about this whole race idea. Thanks for watching, bye for now.